Today, our question for Research Like a Pro with DNA, our question and answer series is how to add a lookup field to your Airtable research log. So this question came in. It says on Airtable, I would like the event details field to show up on both the research log and the timeline without having to retype them twice. But I don't know how to make this happen. I don't know how to link fields between two different tables. This is a great question. And I actually tweaked and changed my template so that it did this exact thing. So I'm glad someone asked this question so we can go over it. First, let's talk about lookup fields in Airtable. So a lookup field depends on linking records. And if you have a linked record, then you can add a lookup field. Now, in the Research Like a Pro with DNA 4.0 2024 template that I made, the research log and the timeline are linked. And in the past, they've been static or separate tables that weren't linked, but now they're linked. And so the research log is the home for all of your sources and citations. And then the timeline is where you put in dates and details. And in one source, as you very well know, you may have 4 or 5 different dates. So just imagine like a pension record that reveals a marriage date and the death date of a soldier and the date of his service. So you would have one entry in the research log for that, and then 3 entries in the timeline. And then when you get to the source field in the timeline, you would select the source of the pension. And that's the linked record field. Well, in the research log, this is where you would have the results from the pension, for example, and that would usually be like a summary or a transcription of what is contained, the information, all that information, and then the source citation. And then you add the events and the dates from the source into the timeline and then link to that source, like I already said. Now, when we talk about lookup fields, there's 2 different things you might want to do. So right now, the template has a lookup field copying the citation over from the research log and adding it to the timeline so that you can see that in your timeline. But you may also want to add a lookup field for the results and copy that to the timeline. Because when you're looking at your timeline, sometimes you just want to know everything that's in that source and not just that one little date or detail that you had pulled out to put in the timeline. So let's look at some examples. So here in this timeline or research log, actually, in the research log, let's just look at the results field. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit and then we'll see it better. So zooming in on the research log, you can see that the results column, how I use it at least, has a quote or a transcription or a summary from the record. So the 1850 census has Samuel Haworth, age 54, male, farmer, $2,000 value of real estate, born in Tennessee. And then the next person in the household was Hannah Haworth. But because you have these people's ages in 1850, you can add them to the timeline for and say their birth and use this 1850 census for the source. So that's what the results field is for in the research log. Okay, now in the timeline table, this is what the question was asking about. There's this event details column, and this is where you can put a note or a sentence or a phrase about the specific event that you're including. So the event description is a formula that's automatically created for you by putting together the event type. Let's zoom in a little bit. The event description puts together the event type, which is the birth, the date, which is June 1st, 1828, and the name of the person, which isn't visible right now. It's a hidden field. And I just hid it for the purposes of making us be able to see more things on this. I wanted to be able to show the event details in the source, but I usually don't hide that when I'm working. Well, when you have the event description, it doesn't always include everything you want. So that's why I added event details, because sometimes you just want to add a little bit more there to your timeline to be able to understand what that event is about. So for Elam Hollingsworth's birth, I put Elam was born June 1st at Quaker Point, Vermilion, Indiana, to Jesse and Nancy Patton. Nancy was his second wife. So the parents weren't already here, but the place, the birthday event date were already there. So I just added a couple things there. And this comes from a 2013 biography. That's the source. And you can see this is a linked record field because the text is gray around it. So this is where I've selected the source from my research log. And then these next two fields are lookup fields, the URL, the source citation. And so you could potentially add another column here that has all the results from that source. And in this case, it would be a copy and paste of that whole page of that biography. But what if you want to see the event details in your research log? You could also add a lookup field in the research log to see what are the details from the timeline for this specific event. So I'll show you how to do both of those. So they're both going to be lookup fields. So if you're in the timeline table and you want to add a lookup field for the results, which would be the entire transcription of that source from the research log, then you need to go to the source field, click the arrow to get the dropdown, and then choose Add Lookup Fields. And then you will choose which field you want to bring over from the research log table, and this one is results. That's the one we want to bring over. And then you click Add One Field, and now I have the transcription or the summary for that entire source in my timeline to be able to see that. And that can be really useful when you're looking in your timeline to just quickly see what does everything say from that biography. And then I can see more context about his birth and the rest of the biography. And then, I have the birth of Elam Hollingsworth from the 1870 census and the 1862 census. And then both of those sources will have the entire transcription one after the other here. Okay, now let's try it again from the other side. So we're in the timeline right now, and let's say we want to go ahead and go over to the research log and add the event details from the timeline. So now we're in the research log, and we can scroll over to the right, and this is where the timeline entries will be. So every row in the timeline that's linked to a source will show up here. And you can see that the 1870 census has at least three, maybe more down below, three timeline entries. So if you want to add a lookup field from the timeline to bring over the event details, you can do that here in the same way. Just click on that arrow and then add lookup field. So we clicked here on the timeline linked record field. Then we click add lookup fields. Then we choose event details. And now we have a new field here, which is event details from timeline. And let me zoom in. Whenever you have a lookup field, it tells you what table it comes from. So this one says event details from timeline, and it has a little magnifying glass as the icon. And so for this second row here, where the two timeline entries are census of Martha McKeach, 1851, and birth of Martha McKeach, 1846, it adds a comma after it brings over the event details for the first one. So the event details for the first one is 5-year-old Martha resided with her parents, William and Martha Keach, and 6 siblings, period. And that comes from census of Martha McKeach. Then comma, that's going to come from birth of Martha McKeach. So that source, that timeline entry, the event details for that are Martha's calculated birth year is 1846, age 5 on 1851 census, and was born in Kempston. So if you want to bring over those event details from the timeline, that's how you could do it. All right. So, this is just a little video showing us what it looks like when you open up the timeline entries, and you can see the event details from each one and how they're added together with a comma separating them in this lookup field. So if you link more than one record, that's fine. You will then just have both event details with a comma separating them. And that's actually how it works with the timeline when you add, let's see if I can go back. When you add two different sources, the same thing happens with this lookup field. that goes from the timeline over to the research log and brings over both the citations. So first we'll have the 1870 census and you can't see it because it's below. But if you expanded this cell, you would be able to see a comma and then the citation for the 1862 marriage. Now, one drawback that one of us in the study group noticed is that the lookup fields do not preserve any rich text formatting. So if you have italics for ancestry or family search, the publications, those won't be preserved in the lookup field. So it's good to always open up the source and copy and paste the citation that way. All right, any questions about linking and lookup fields?
No, we don't have any questions, but that is such a great way to just add a little bit more depth to the research log and the timeline. So thank you.
Okay, great.